Hello and welcome to the Big 12 Mafia show. How are you doing today? I'm your host, Nathan Bomber Brown, and I actually hit the wrong open. I hit the Holy Rivals open, so I hope everybody who's here, if you haven't seen it, you can appreciate that because it's really good. With me today are a couple of my key contributors. That would be Immaculate and Moen. How are you guys doing?
Excellent.
Doing
Looking
great.
forward to this one.
Yeah, we've been excited to talk to somebody from Notre Dame. And today we are actually very lucky to have Dylan from the Four Horsemen podcast on with us today. How you doing, Dylan?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me.
No, of course. Let me get some business out of the way and then we'll jump right in. So if you're new to the channel, please, or the show, please give us a thumbs up, leave us a comment or suggestion, subscribe, turn on your notifications. We're a little early today. We're normally on about an hour and a half later than this. So anybody who comes in this early, we really appreciate you being here. I know there's some that are even still working. So if maybe we've caught you on your drive time or other than that, just want to make sure you know we appreciate it. As well, if you want to leave a comment, just go ahead and do the live comment section. We certainly read those and we try to get through those throughout the shows. If you want to guarantee your comment is read, you can make it a super chat. And I think that, we're probably going to have a few unique questions because we're dealing with Notre Dame today, that if you want to get yours out, it may have to be a super chat. The last thing that I would like to recommend is if you want to become a member of the channel, you go to the Big 12 Mafia main page. In the middle of the page, you'll see a join button. It's very small and innocuous, but if you happen to hit it, it'll take you up to the three options to join, and you can become a member. We're about 30 members now, which is pretty good for a show that is not a full-time type gig for me. So we appreciate all those subscribers, and then obviously the members. Last thing I want to do is I want to promote BYU mini helmets. Up in the upper right-hand corner of your page, you'll see a QR code. You can just scan that QR code. It'll take you right to the BYU mini helmet site. And as you can see, I've got a few back here that you can look at. There's this really cool BYU Navy that we played in the BYU had in the bowl game this last year. And then this is probably my favorite, which is the electric Royal with white face mask. Anyway, if you want to get one for your husband, your wife, your significant other, your kids, they're wonderful, sort of mementos. And I definitely want to promote that business. He's been a great partner for me, and I appreciate him being here. All right. Since we've been tooling up for this for a while, I'm actually going to let Immaculate ask the first question because he's the one who really put this together. And Dylan, again, I really appreciate you being here today.
I'm excited to be here. I mean, me and Immaculate met on Twitter, and we had a great few public conversations that turned into private conversations. So this worked out perfect, and I'm happy to really be here.
That's awesome. Before Immaculate, you take off, let me just say some early hellos to people. Conundrum's here. Caden's dad, Sergeant Pickles, one of our members. Glenn Lumen, who's in the Philippines. Good to see you here, Glenn. We got Opie. Let's see. BR is another one of our members. AMAC, Steve Ohio, Florida. Let's see. Jared Jones, who's another Ohio State guy. And let's see. Doc Gibbs, good to see you here. And Tebow 49. Welcome, everybody. I really appreciate you being here. And we're going to talk ACC. We're going to talk Notre Dame. We're going to talk realignment. And we'll have to see where we end up in an hour or so. All right. Go ahead, Immaculate.
All right. Well, I'll take over here, I guess. Really happy to have you on, Dylan. Like you said, we've had some good conversations, both public and private. Kind of thought about having this happen. And then I noticed you also had a pretty good public conversation with fellow contributor Moen. That's when I realized this could be quite the electric conversation going on here. So I hope you've got your helmet strapped on and ready for that one. Moen, how you feeling about that one? Are you all laced up and ready to go?
Gosh.
I am ready to go. I told these guys I'd be on my best behavior. No matter how much I hate Notre Dame, I will be on my best behavior tonight.
Now, best behavior for an Ohio State fan is how many crimes committed in a night?
No felonies.
Ooh, he was ready. He was ready to go.
Misdemeanors or less.
No, I got nothing negative to say about Ohio State, to be honest with you. They've been the dominant program in the North for the last 2 decades. So until we beat them, there's nothing to say but to respect them. So hopefully it doesn't turn into a pissing competition, but I'm looking forward to the exchanges.
Yeah, I think you'll probably still have a good thought about them after this. Moen might change your mind, though. We'll see. But I think it's going to be a great conversation for everyone involved. And I'm kind of bringing a little bit of a different Big Ten perspective, one of, I guess, appreciation, you could say, and more, I think, Notre Dame joining a conference in the future is kind of an inevitable thing. Would you, from a Notre Dame perspective, we don't get that very much. Would you say that's also something you see in the future, or is that still up in the air?
Well, it looks like we're headed towards that. The answer might be when, how long can Notre Dame hold out for? But just with the nature of this game, the nature of the business, and with Notre Dame being both very hard to read sometimes and very stubborn, I wouldn't say definitively one way or the other yet. I would say it's definitely, it looks like we're going to have to be in a conference one day, but you never know what the landscape of the sport looks like. Could you see a potential Power 2 breakaway that kind of allows Notre Dame involved? Probably not, but, who knows? I don't want to say inevitable, but it's certainly looking that way with the developments of the last few years and maybe beyond, really.
Yeah, I think as an independent, which Notre Dame, all due respect to BYU in the house, Notre Dame's probably done better than anyone else in figuring out how to get that done. As these conferences get larger and as they grow, and as the conference schedule is going to have to grow in order to suit that, do you think that is something like Notre Dame will have issues with in terms of scheduling?
It could be. It depends what all the conferences do. So to kind of trap Notre Dame, there would need to be some kind of coordinated effort, or at least some coincidences happening at the same time. So, for example, if the Big Ten goes to 10 games, yeah, that would be difficult to maybe get some of those Big Ten teams on the schedule. We've got current games scheduled against Wisconsin, Michigan State, and Purdue, and then about a decade from now, Michigan and Indiana as well. We'll see if that holds. But if, let's say, the Big Ten goes to 10 games and the SEC doesn't and the Big 12 doesn't, there'll still be teams for Notre Dame to play. It might not be the rivals, but one thing Notre Dame has always been good at is adapting. And if you look at kind of our rival list, a lot of those rivalries started at different eras. Like, it wasn't all from the beginning, right? The Miami rivalry is one that really picked up in the 1980s. I don't necessarily consider Penn State a rival today, but for a good decade there, between Lou Holtz and Joe, there were great games, great rivalry there as well. So Notre Dame's a team that can adapt, but it depends, I think, what the other conferences do to really answer that question.
Just to kind of reach over Nate here on that. As a BYU guy, like how much did that play into the BYU wanting to become part of the Big Ten, do you think, just in terms of scheduling? And as things move forward with realignment, was that ever a problem for BYU, or is it mostly just wanting to kind of move up in competition?
You said Big Ten. You meant the Big 12.
Big 12,
right?
sorry. Yeah, in terms of scheduling.
No, that's no problem. So Notre Dame's been independent, obviously, for 100 years or something. I mean, it's some ridiculous ground game that they've built over many, many decades to be able to get these scheduling agreements put together. The fact that BYU was able to pull it off, I think everybody has given them extreme credit for able to even cobble together this schedules that they could, because the more conference games that have been filling up, the less bandwidth there is for out of conference games. That's why the beginnings of years would be great for BYU, but by November they're playing schools that normally you would not want to be up against. So that's probably the biggest challenge to being an independent, and why I think you would have to be pretty unique to be able to pull it off. Now, of all the schools that are kind of out of the mix right now that want to be active, it's Stanford, right? Yeah. And Stanford is the one that I think if they wanted to, they could put the resources in and they could cobble together an independent schedule. The problem is, how dedicated are they to football, for instance? Is that a big important thing? And I just don't know if they're going to be able to pull that out. The other thing about BYU is once you got into the Big 12, they're going to be the most loyal school in the conference. So anything that needs to happen as far as scheduling or moving around schedules and dates, BYU will be one of those schools that will be able to meet those sort of needs. I would love to see Notre Dame, get in the Big Ten for one, and I'd love to see them still continue to get their out of conference games. If they're in the Big Ten, they obviously pick up USC, Penn State, Michigan, every once in a while on Ohio State. So that would be great, right?
Mhm.
Then you add USC, and then maybe you have a Oregon and Washington. So that conference would be a monster if Notre Dame would come in. But are they willing to trade their power? Basically, an entire school represents the same power in some of these voting blocks that conferences do. And to lose that is something that I think Jack Swarbrick would absolutely fall on his sword before he would let that happen. So I don't know when that changes.
Well, that might be why he's retiring. We'll see. But kind of segueing from what you were saying there, back over to Dylan. In terms of looking at conferences to possibly join in the future, if, there's a big if here. I know a lot of people talk about the Big Ten. Obviously, Notre Dame has a relationship with the ACC. And I know I've seen plenty of Big 12 folks say that they'd put forward for that. Just from the Notre Dame perspective, yourself and everyone else kind of in your community, how do you think that Notre Dame fans would feel about those three conferences?
Are we talking full membership? Because that kind of changes the answer a little bit.
You could be full membership, but if the focus is still to maintain partial with one, I mean, that could be part of it as well.
So we ran a poll at the Four Horsemen podcast on Twitter asking this question in the off season, and overwhelming favorite was to remain independent. That's, I think, over 70% of respondents answered that way. Obviously, there's a little bit of sampling bias there because Twitter's not a scientific method, but it gave us a good idea. The second place runner-up was the Big Ten by quite a large margin. And then the ACC/SEC was third. Those are the three options for full membership or starting your own conference, which is something I think we can get into as well. But I think with Notre Dame, because the preference is to remain independent, so for example, let's say the ACC falls apart, there would be preference to, let's say, join the Big 12 as a partial member before joining anyone as a full member. That's how much the independence matters. And I believe the Big 12 and Notre Dame were kind of close to it in the past. When Notre Dame had joined the ACC, the Big 12 made a big push for Notre Dame as well. And I wouldn't put that out of the realm of possibility. It depends what happens here with the landscape. But in terms of ranking those options, the Big 10 is the favorite for full membership. The SEC is probably second, although the Stanford stuff kind of changes things a little because that adds another friend to the conference. It's also a conference where Notre Dame could exert a little more influence than the SEC if they were to join one. So I don't know if that fully answered your question there, but that's kind of, I think, how the fan base generally breaks it down. And then I, of course, have my preferences for conference membership as well.
Do you think they pull that off? Their influence is pretty big in the ACC. It was a shocker to most people in realignment that Notre Dame carried a full vote within the ACC conference when it came to realignment instead of a partial, which is what they represent for their sports. Do you think that gets done? That Stanford, and nobody mentions Cal, whether Cal gets in or not, nobody cares. But do you think they actually bring them in?
Man, that's a good question. I've not been able to get my thumb on this situation for the last 2 weeks. It seems like Stanford's going to the ACC, then they're not, and then the Big Ten is calling, and then they're not, and then the ACC is back on. That's hard to say. In terms of, I'll try to answer that, come back around to it. The Notre Dame partial vote thing, or partial membership, it's for all sports except football and hockey, because there is no hockey in the ACC. They're a Big Ten member for hockey. And also, Notre Dame is part of the ACC network, and I do believe they get a healthy payout from that network. So that's why they have a full vote. The one sport that matters, they're not in, and that's why I think it's hard for people to wrap their minds around it. I have no doubt that Notre Dame was pushing for Stanford. I just don't know if that's going to get done. I don't know how the logistics of it would work. I don't understand how Stanford would be let in if they didn't take football seriously. So going back to something you guys mentioned earlier, whether it's independence Big Ten, ACC, Stanford's probably going to be told you have to take football seriously if you want to remain at this top level of NCAA athletics. So
Right.
we'll see if they can pull it off. If a gun to my head, I'll say no, but I could easily see it going either way. I would imagine a lot of these certain types of ACC schools, let's say like Boston College, Wake Forest, saw what happened in the Pac-12 and are probably wanting to be proactive. And I do believe there would be a lot of support for it. I mean, the SMU stuff to me is a no-brainer. They're offering to come in for free, and you're in a major Dallas market there. That I don't want to call them a sleeping giant, but that would be such a great addition. And the fact that there's still opposition to that one is a little intriguing to me. In terms of just Stanford and Cal, I'm going to say no, but it depends what those Carolina schools do, right? Because the NC State kind of being the no vote allegedly it's interesting. And Miami being on a yes vote is also very interesting. So your guess is as good as mine, if not better, but we'll see. And I hope they do, obviously, from a Notre Dame perspective. I don't love Stanford that much, but having them in the conference is better than not having them in the conference. And of course, they're a great academic institution to hang out with the ACC schools.
Immaculate, here's a comment for you. Notre Dame has been a major force behind this. Phillips, who is the conference commissioner for the ACC, I didn't know this. It was a former Notre Dame employee, which is interesting. Loves Notre Dame, and several weeks back was pushing for the Pac-12 alliance, which we know was a joke. This vote, if yes, is just ACC doing Notre Dame bidding again. This is what we're here to talk about today. Mm-hmm. What is the influence that Notre Dame has on the conference as a whole? And are they voting, realizing that at any time they could get up and leave if it became a mess and join the Big Ten, and there wouldn't be any weight associated with it?
Yeah. To add to that real quick before Dylan jumps in on that one, we've also seen here recently that 4 different schools in the ACC, actually 3 schools, have presidents who come from Stanford with graduated. 1 is from Cal. And then we also, Swarbrick is a Stanford law grad. So when I look at the situation, and I know a lot of people are saying Notre Dame is pushing this, but maybe, Dylan, do you wonder if maybe Stanford is pushing Notre Dame to do this for them? Because Stanford has a lot of folks also going to bat for them within the ACC. I mean, do you feel like Notre Dame is pushing this heavily for them, or do you feel like maybe they're just kind of part of the whole?
I think both of those things are true. I was going to say, and I'm glad you brought it up, people kind of think this is Notre Dame pulling the strings, and I really don't think it is. I think there's a lot of support within the ACC for Stanford. One, just for saving the conference in the sense of trying to secure its stability. Right. The finances is what doesn't make it work. So that will have to be maybe somewhere for there to be compromise to get them in. But as you pointed out, Stanford has many, many powerful people in this business, particularly within the ACC. Jack Swarbrick is a Stanford alum. So I would imagine there is pressure being influenced, not just on Notre Dame, which I do believe there would be, but on some of the other schools as well, trying to flex those Stanford muscles. And I think Notre Dame would be happy to also advocate for Stanford. They're very aligned on a lot of things. They're both private schools, take academics very seriously, have kind of pushed back against the money that's being flown into the sport. Although they'll both have to change their position on that if they want to stay, I think, relevant in the future. And yeah, they get along. It's a California game, and I think maybe that's not understood by some people for its importance. The Notre Dame Stanford rivalry isn't some big historic one that is 100 games played from the beginning of time, like USC, right? They only started playing annually, I believe, in the 90s.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a game for Notre Dame to go to California because I'm sure, as you guys know, Notre Dame is very much a national recruiting program. They even a good year or a bad year, they'll get kids from all over the country. And one of the best states for Notre Dame has been California. So having that ability to play USC and then go to Cal and then reverse it has been a huge recruiting thing for the Irish. However, the NCAA now has a blackout period at the end of that week. So Thanksgiving weekend, Notre Dame would stay in California, whether it be at USC or Stanford, and recruit the state for that week. But now there's a no contact period. So that has also changed things. So I don't know how much of Notre Dame's loyalty to Stanford is rivalry based rather than those kinds of connections. And I think, Immaculate, that's a great point to raise. Is Stanford, I think, is having a lot more influence than people think. And I also believe other schools are pushing for this beyond Notre Dame. It's just Notre Dame is probably viewed as the leader for it, given its stature, but also when you look at who's in the other corner, right? Florida State, Clemson, who's going to advocate for the other side of the ACC? Well, Notre Dame, I guess, makes a lot of sense there. So hopefully that is the situation. I know Notre Dame's getting a lot of heat for making this push because of its partial affiliation, but we'll see. And I'm interested to read the article that reveals all once it comes out in a couple months.
Yeah,
Maybe next week, right? Who knows what that works.
Sooner rather than later.
I want Moen to take this. Moen's been very silent. He sits back like he's a stalker and then always snipes with good answers. So yeah, I'm going to let you take this, Moen. I'll read it and then you can bring it on. So Daniel Gygax, thank you very much for the super chat. He says, I have heard differing amounts. How much will it cost for Notre Dame to leave the ACC? And why is Notre Dame wanting to keep the ACC together? If the ACC blows up, would that help hurt Notre Dame? Okay, Moen, go.
$125 million is the estimated cost for Notre Dame to clear themselves with the exit fee and the grant of rights money for all the sports that aren't football. That's widely been agreed upon as being in that $125 to $150 million range. Notre Dame wants to keep the ACC together because Notre Dame gets everything they want from the ACC. They get football independence, and I have to disagree with Dylan. They exert an unnaturally amount of force within the ACC. If the ACC blows up, would it hurt Notre Dame? Absolutely, because Notre Dame's key is to remain independent and be special. If ACC blows up, there's no way that Notre Dame can maintain their independence. And if the Big 12 wanted to get into a devil's handshake the same way the ACC has with Notre Dame, you're going to see Notre Dame exerting a lot more influence on the Big 12 as well. So people thinking that they're going to get certain teams in, Notre Dame's going to have a say on that.
Dylan.
Yeah, I largely agree with that. I've heard 120 million. Once the USC and UCLA move happened, that's when that number started to leak. Just from a little bit of a legal perspective, there are several things they would be on the hook for because they're scheduled for 5 ACC games a year until 2036. So that is monetary damage there. There's also an exit fee for leaving the ACC. And then there is a potential alleged rumor that there's a clause in there that says Notre Dame, if they join a conference, has to be the ACC for football. And I can't imagine a court ever enforcing a specific performance on that, meaning requiring Notre Dame to join the ACC, but rather there would be a monetary damage for it. So yeah, 120 million makes a lot of sense to me. I would say, with regards to the ACC relationship, Notre Dame has given that conference lots of viewership boosts, representation in the college football playoffs, ranked games, and I think that's probably well worth the trade-off of whatever influence Notre Dame has in the ACC. I mean, the only other time they've really exerted their influence to a huge degree was when they joined the conference during the COVID year to have a football season. And I think the Big 12 wouldn't have to fear if Notre Dame were to arrange something like that. I think it is a benefit for the whole conference. I know there is an understanding there that, or at least a perception that Notre Dame's taking advantage or it benefits Notre Dame more than anybody. I think it's a win-win for any conference to have Notre Dame in it in any kind of capacity. And then, yeah, Moen's entitled to the strong opinion, and I respect it. So, yeah, I think that's my response.
Well, as part of that, and you guys can maybe back me up or set me straight on this, but that vote came in 2016 when you guys signed on with them for the extension to the ACC Gore when you guys joined, and that had to do with the ACC network. And Notre Dame's value that it brought to that was a significant part of that, was it not, Dylan?
I believe so, although to be perfectly transparent, I haven't been following it that closely since 2016. This is more of a recent development for me, I would say. I would say once your biggest rival goes from the West Coast to the Midwest Conference, that that brings your attention to it. Other than that, I was like any other Notre Dame fan. I had my head in the sand with this stuff. This silly little conference thing. Who cares? They'll sort themselves out, and Notre Dame will be just fine. And things have changed there, right? So. I'm not too sure to answer the question. I would imagine so, because Notre Dame gives up a game to the ACCN, I believe, every year. There's always one game where we have one game on Peacock, we have one game on whatever platform the ACC network is on. So I imagine that is a significant contribution. And one of the reasons the conference members were okay with the deal is the value Notre Dame adds to it, and the exposure, the local economies when they come to town for football. So yeah, lots of positives to it. But I understand Moan's position as well. It does look like we're severely taking advantage of someone.
But at the same time, I mean, you guys are full members of the conference in every other sport besides hockey.
Yes.
So I would, playing devil's advocate here, since we've talked a little lawyering, is that's mainly what Stanford would probably be coming into the ACC for. The ACC supports more Olympic sports than any other conference. So in that light, it works pretty good for Stanford. And since Notre Dame plays all their games over there, I'd say they have an interest in that. Now, where I think the debate comes in is because football is the biggest money. I think this is probably what you're saying, Moen, is that Notre Dame shouldn't be allowed to do that. But are they wrong for doing that because the contract that they signed and everyone else signed allows for it? Or is this something that needs to be relooked at, Moen?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that needs to be relooked at, but I would add this too. Notre Dame gets their own vote in the college football playoff committee.
That's right.
That's right. That's
and
a whole
Notre
other
Dame
issue there.
Gets an additional vote because they're somewhat a member of the ACC.
Yeah.
How is it acceptable for Notre Dame to get essentially 2 votes in the college football playoff?
Well, the one vote is by far the stronger, which is the 10+1. Although now we're losing the Pac-4 more than likely. So it'll be 9+1, which is Notre Dame's vote. So they have their own vote within a conference, and then they have a super vote in relation to the actual playoff committee, which is basically right now 10 conferences in one school. So it's an outsized amount of influence, which is what I really respect Dylan's opinion, that he says it's unique and they would like to keep that. I'm thinking this is going to turn into more of a financial thing. In the 80s and 90s, when Notre Dame was at its peak control, when they had the most power that they've ever had in college football, it was before the Bowl Alliance came around. And they could exert an inordinate amount of influence because these leagues weren't working together. There was no coordination, in essence. And then they put the Bowl Alliance together, and it changed a little bit. And then Notre Dame morphed from their control as an independent to more of, now we're going to operate like we're a super conference. And as long as they have access to that, I do not see Notre Dame. In other words, let me say it a different way. I think if Notre Dame changes, it's going to be because somebody forces them to change. Something in the contract changes, maybe in the renegotiation in 2026 for the playoff changes. But if I was Notre Dame and I continue to get paid by a conference, by a TV contract, which I didn't know that they were getting part of the ACC network, but Dylan told us that, and then they get their own contract with NBC or whoever they want, why would they want to walk away from that? I just, unless they're forced to, essentially they're pushed into a corner that they have to accept. I don't see why that would change. John F. Hopkins, thanks for being here. I just wanted to get your comment out because you're one of our members. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you being here today. I don't know. What do you guys say to that?
Well, I mean, since we're going into the CFP part of it, that's actually the one realm in which I am a little bit, I guess I could say, pushy on Notre Dame. And I would hope that Notre Dame fans could at least understand that having that element, in my opinion, probably holds the process up. If there's any reason why I would like to see Notre Dame pick a conference, mainly the Big Ten, but any conference will do. I think what we're trying to get to, or at least where the people in charge are trying to get to, I think we'll get there a lot quicker if everyone is on the same page. And to you, Dylan, to the outside, it looks like Notre Dame might be an obstructionist when that may not be the case. But how do you feel about that and the opinions that, we'll say, outsiders might have of Notre Dame having that special privilege in the CFP?
Right. The first thing I would say is, well, Notre Dame's a big reason why we have a CFP to begin with. Jack Schwarbrick was instrumental in that process. And I would say any program, and I'll particularly point out Alabama and Ohio State, for example. Let's say they were independent. They're not, but let's say the roles were reversed. I think the same treatment would be given for them too. It's the brand, it's the value, it's too big to fail, and you get special privileges out of that. It's just kind of the nature of the game here. That's why we have this conference realignment to begin with. With respect to the obstructionist comment, obstructioning what? Like what are we preventing from happening? Because a lot of what I'm seeing out there, particularly from the expansion community, I would say, and obviously that has different types and opinions and different subsects, but there seems to be a push for a Power 2 breakaway, and I don't like that. I don't think Notre Dame likes that. I don't think most college football fans like it. So if Notre Dame's being obstructing our path to that, then I would say that's a good thing. If they're obstructing the path to maybe, it depends what we're talking about, and that's kind of why I almost pitched that question back is, what are we getting in the way of here, and why is that the case? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm not in those rooms, but Jack Schwarbrick's definitely having those conversations.
Oh, 100%. And to me, I guess when I say obstructionist, I mean you have a different interest at the table than everyone else who's at the table. They have their conferences to look forward to. Each person who's there represents a school, but they're representing the conference that their school belongs to. And so there is an element of conference involvement in the playoffs, and any type of rule that they might want to make towards that, I would assume would be countervoted by Notre Dame. Because as far as I'm aware on the CFP management side, one vote is enough to make something stop, to make a motion stop. Are you, have you looked into that much?
I'm not familiar about that, because I was just about to say, well, that's just one vote, right? Like if the rest of the committee votes otherwise, so be it. That's that's how the democracy works. But if that's the case, I'm not too sure. I haven't gotten that deep into the weeds with the college football procedure, but Notre Dame is an important voice, and they're the historically independent school, so it's not like I guess they have some representation in the ACC, but Notre Dame's interests have always been different, and Notre Dame has contributed a lot to the sport. So I would say from a Notre Dame perspective, who would really voice that opinion for us on our behalf if we were in a conference? And that is kind of one of the concerns with joining a conference, particularly one where we have a shaky history with, is, I don't really know if the Big Ten would advocate Notre Dame's best interest. If Notre Dame was in the Big Ten for the COVID season, we would not have played football.
Yeah.
Right. Because the Big Ten was not going to play football. The SEC and then the ACC did once Notre Dame got on board for the season. So having that autonomy and being able to speak for yourself is something that, we value. And I understand that would upset people who feel like that's a special treatment. I get it, but that we've been able to pull it off. And, if you, meaning any other fan of a school could, why don't you? And it is a benefit. There's benefits to independence for sure.
And I think that's a good chance. If you got a chance here, Nate, to pull up Sid Irish's comment out there in chat.
So which one?
If your team had Indy's perks, you'd use them too. It's right in line with what we're talking about. And I think he's one of our Irish fans that's out here chatting. So I think we bring it up because I actually agree with him. And I don't hold that against Notre Dame in using those. It's just a matter of, by it existing, I think it might be holding things up. But I think this might be a good chance for Moen to also jump in here. We've just heard from Dylan saying that, and our Irish fan in chat saying that. How do you feel? Like, do you think that OSU would do the same thing if they were in that position?
No, OSU could do that same thing right now and demand unequal revenue share from everybody else in the Big Ten. They don't do it. Why? Because the Big Ten Conference believes more in it as a conference. It is completely unjustifiable that Notre Dame, a single entity, a single institution, gets the same vote as a conference with 18 schools in it.
Yeah.
As far as the COVID season, Ohio State and Nebraska worked very hard with other members of the Big Ten Conference to get football during COVID season. It wasn't like we didn't have football at all. We just had to work through it, but we did work through it. I do agree, though, that we wouldn't have this conference realignment situation if it wasn't for Notre Dame. Notre Dame goes back. If Notre Dame had joined the Big Ten in the 1995 season, we likely would still have at least 5 conferences available. I don't think we would be moving towards the A3 model. I think we'd still be at an A5 or possibly an A6 model with a reconstituted Big East. I just do not agree that in 2023, and all due respect to Notre Dame, you guys were a historic independent, but so was Penn State, and they joined a conference. So was Florida State, and they joined a conference.
How has that worked out for Penn State, by the way? You know, what was once a more national brand has become regionalized and hasn't won a national championship since. Neither is Notre Dame, but that has nothing to do with joining the Big Ten. And in fact, I'm glad you brought up Penn State, because that is the one kind of scare tactic Notre Dame fans use to kind of push independence is you don't want to become Penn State, do you? You don't want to become a regionalized team that's just another Big Ten team, particularly behind Michigan and Ohio State. Sorry to cut you off there. You said Penn State, and I wanted to jump in there.
Well, how has it worked out for Penn State? Penn State is in a conference that just signed the most lucrative media deal in history. Penn State is in a conference that has some of the best research institutions in the United States. Penn State's downfall was due to the fact that Joe Paterno was willing to overlook a pedophile, and then they made some terrible coaching hires. So, I mean, what would happen to Notre Dame if they joined the Big Ten? Well, I mean, they'd probably either sink or swim. I mean, that's going to be up to Notre Dame. You can't put what happened to Penn State on the basis of them joining the Big Ten. It happened because Penn State made some mistakes, some egregious mistakes on the part of their administration and their football. But I don't think you can use that as a blanket statement. Look at how well Florida State did when they joined the ACC. They've won national championships. So, I mean, going independent and joining a conference doesn't necessarily mean that you're ruined. And if we want to get right down to it, the year Ohio State went to the playoffs and got blown out by Clemson 31-0, that should have been Penn State's spot in the playoff. I don't agree with that as an Ohio State fan. Penn State got a bad game held against them, whereas Ohio State got a bad game overlooked. But Penn State was the Big Ten champion that year and should have been in the college football playoffs. So not everything has been terrible for Penn State.
So let's stop here for 1 second. Appreciate everybody who's watching the show. We started early tonight. I appreciate everybody being here. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, leave us a comment or suggestion, and also make sure you turn on those notifications. I've got a note here that Mr. Monkey says he didn't get a notification even though he turned them on and the internet is broken. And then quickly right after that, BR says monkeys don't get notifications. So Mr. Monkey, I guess there's your recovery answer. So we appreciate everybody being here. You guys know we're all just having fun. And I really appreciate everybody being here early. If you want to join the channel as a member, go to the main Big 12 Mafia page on YouTube. Middle of the page, there's a join button. Click that. Gives you some options. You can join. And I give preference to those comments always. And then obviously super chats. We always read super chats. I haven't missed one yet, and we're almost at 40 shows. So I think I've done pretty good at that. All right. So I want to follow on because I think this is the heart of it. And we can cut through the ACC, Stanford. The thing with Notre Dame is, at what point does the rest of college football say, Notre Dame, we're not going to treat you special, in essence? And I agree with you. If BYU could get the same access that Notre Dame does, I absolutely would want BYU to do it. If Oregon State could get the same level of access, and preference, they would take it. There's not a school out there that would turn down that opportunity. But let's flip it over and say, I think there's 131 or 133 schools competing this year in FBS, all tiers in FBS. Is it really fair that let's just say 131? Is it? And I got to say this: I hate the word fair. Okay, I've told my kids, I raised 4 kids; they're all adults now, and we did not use the word fair in my house. I think it's a garbage word, because life isn't fair. There's nothing out there that's really fair. But I would say this: there's an equity discussion to be held. And Dylan, I'm going to give you first on this. The equity portion is, why does Notre Dame command the level of equity that they do when you look at the history where, BYU won a championship in 84. I was there. I was in high school in 88 when they won their championship. So it's been a minute since Notre Dame has won a national championship, and they haven't been in many playoffs, and even in the playoffs, they haven't won a game. So this is an honest question. This is a question I think I'm representing 99.9% of the fans out there. How does Notre Dame, as a university, how do you see them representing that?
So in the last 10 years, I believe Notre Dame is 6th in wins. They've had 2 playoff appearances, 2018 and 2020. They're certainly back on the cusp of being elite. They're not there yet, but this isn't Charlie Weiss's Notre Dame. As far as the equity goes, that's their value. Notre Dame has immense value to this sport for several reasons. Not just the contributions such as, popularizing the forward pass, but also, for example, bringing in large portions of fans from all over the country. Notre Dame, we have a term called subway alumni. What that refers to is the large contingency of Notre Dame fans who never went to Notre Dame. And part of that reason is because Notre Dame had been playing in the cities, in New York, in Chicago. They've played across the country because they couldn't schedule any teams in the Western Conference at the time, which I'm sure we can get into. And what that did was created a huge, huge brand from coast to coast that brought fans in from all over the country and abroad. I'm in Canada right now as a Notre Dame fan. That kind of value that they bring to the sport, and clearly it's represented by, or we will see with a TV deal, if there's market value to that, if that is their market value. And I think that's how you justify it. This is what Notre Dame is worth. That brand is something that is special. It is something that is unique. And I think that's how Notre Dame would justify it. We are Notre Dame.
Do you think Alabama has a bigger brand than Notre Dame?
Brand, absolutely not. No, I don't think anybody. I would say maybe Ohio State comes close. Texas, I don't think so. And the reason I would say Notre Dame is by far the number one brand is it doesn't matter what state you're in. You probably know Notre Dame fans, right?
Well, I could say the same thing about BYU fans.
I can't comment on BYU, but they do have that same aspect of Notre Dame being a religiously affiliated school, right? So
it's international, right?
Right.
Anywhere you go, traveling international, if you're wearing a BYU hat, just like a Notre Dame hat,
right,
people call it out. That by itself justifies the level of the exertion of control that they have.
No, it's the value they bring to the sport, to the networks, to the teams, to the local economies. It's like if Alabama or Ohio State were independent, they would exert this kind of influence too, I believe.
But they're not, though.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And that's a very unique thing for Notre Dame, and it's, I don't know if we could ever get folks on the opposing sides of that to really understand it. I know from me and my perspective, I don't really understand it or get it, but I get that it's a big deal for you guys. For me, it's kind of like, hopefully you guys realize there's a lot of folks in the Big Ten or even in the Big 12 who would happily have you guys join and understand how much value it brings to the conference. But what I'd say, you guys really touched upon it with the Penn State situation and how for so long, I think Notre Dame just saw the Big Ten as this Midwest conference that doesn't really help you out in your overall mission. But with what you see going on nowadays, with things changing so quickly, how do you and, in essence, most Notre Dame folks that you know feel about these changing conferences? I mean, you've got the Big Ten now looking to be coast to coast. You've got the Big 12 going coast to coast. How do you guys feel about this landscape now? Is it maybe changing some minds about conference membership?
I think it's definitely turning people on to the idea. Like I don't think a single Notre Dame fan even thought about the joining a conference thing until USC joined the Big Ten.
Right.
That was the eye opener. I mean, Brady Quinn, I believe, had tweeted out, you know what, it might be time because they're
okay.
building a national conference. How do I feel about that? Well, on the one side, you're stealing our gimmick, which is being the national brand.
Mhm.
And
Right.
I do want to get into that because that might help explain some of the independent stuff. We can talk about that later. But also, on the other hand, I'm not saying it's built for Notre Dame, but I would imagine there is an eye on Notre Dame as the Big Ten expands westward and potentially south. And that's what Notre Dame's all about. They want to play across the country. They want exposure in the biggest markets in America and abroad, apparently, because we're playing in Dublin this Saturday. Tune in for that. But also, being able to recruit, that's a big thing. As the Big Ten fans will know, that's not a resource-rich area for recruitment. You have to move to the Carolinas. You have to get into Florida. You have to get into Georgia. That's the way it's going. So Notre Dame's affiliation with the ACC in that sense has been super beneficial. They've done a really good job of pulling more kids out of the Carolinas and Virginia and in that area. And then on top of that, the whole California thing was big for Notre Dame. So having this national conference now in the Big Ten certainly makes it more appealing. It definitely does. And if Notre Dame were to join, I would feel much, much better about it. And I'm sure we'll get to this later. There are many benefits of joining the Big Ten. I do not want to give off the perception that we just look down on it or we think there's no value to it. There would be a lot of awesome aspects of the Big Ten. It's just that independence means so much to Notre Dame's identity and who they are as a brand that it's a no thanks. We prefer it this way. But if one day I find myself in the Big Ten, man, that's a great situation too. It's not that it's awful or anything. It's just we like it the way we have it. So yeah, hopefully that got to your question.
Well, I would like it the way I have it too, if that was the case where I got 2 votes. I mean, this comes down to Notre Dame holding themselves above everybody else in college football. And I know he might not feel that way as a Notre Dame fan, but that's what it comes off as. That the brand of Notre Dame is more important than every other brand in college football, every other conference in college football, and that their independence should be maintained at the, just preventing college football from ever settling down. Conference realignment, I put this in terms of almost Sherman's total war philosophy. The quicker and crueler we can make this conference realignment, the sooner it's going to be over. Mm-hmm. Notre Dame hanging out there as an independent, maintaining their own, and you're right, Immaculate, it's unanimous votes within the college football playoff. Mm-hmm. So at any point, Notre Dame can throw up their hands and go, oh, no, that affects our independence. We vote no. And they're outvoting how many other total schools within the college football system?
So, Moen,
as one school.
In Notre Dame's defense, though, they're asking for that access, and it's being given to them by the rest of college football. In my opinion, I don't hold Notre Dame responsible for that. As far as I'm concerned, Notre Dame's doing what's best for their school, just like all of our schools are trying to do what's best for their schools. If they ask for something and then people give it to them, you don't blame the requester. You have to blame the guys granting that access.
You do blame the requester, though, when they get that power and it's overruling other people who have nothing to do with that request.
No,
you're saying the ACC gives them this. Fine, the ACC gave them that. But that negatively impacts the SEC, the Big 12, and the Big 10.
I don't disagree with you, but what I'm saying is, how can you hold Notre Dame responsible? They can't tell the other 130 schools what they're supposed to be able to do on their own stuff. It's the responsibility of the schools to tell them no, not the reverse.
I agree. I absolutely agree, and I think it's getting to that point where that needs to be told to Notre Dame.
All right. All I'm saying is, I don't think that's Notre Dame's fault, just for asking. I think every school should do it.
I disagree, because I think with Notre Dame, they've had multiple opportunities to join multiple different conferences. And I understand historic independence, but Penn State joined a conference as an independent. Florida State did. Miami did.
I know.
BYU has. Everybody's joined a conference as an independent.
Yeah,
the days of independence are done. It's time for everybody to get together and be conferences and have equal representation.
But like,
okay,
the moral, ethical side of it isn't going to make this happen, though. I mean, you can make great arguments on it, and I would agree with probably some made on both sides. What's going to make this happen are things advancing. Basically, you kind of need the ACC to fall apart for this to work, don't we?
I think at the end of the day, the ACC is a dying conference. It's just a matter of when. And we know that because of the schools that are holding out. Whether Stanford gets in or not, I think the ACC is dead man walking. And eventually, Notre Dame's going to end up where is best for them. I don't think it has to do with the ACC, though. I think it has to do with the schools leaving that conference, forcing other schools to make decisions.
So as a leading question here to Dylan.
Could I respond to just some of the conversation?
Sure. Oh, yeah. I was going to lead right to you next, but absolutely. If you want to go on.
It also ties back to something me and Moan had discussed earlier, so I thought it was a great opportunity. Nathan, I fully agree with you. Notre Dame is doing what's in Notre Dame's interest like any of these schools would do. And a lot of the hate comes from, I'm going to be honest, jealousy from not having that power. And I understand it. Yeah. I totally get that. My issue with something Mona said twice now is Notre Dame could have joined conferences at multiple times and stabilized the sport. That is not the onus of Notre Dame. Notre Dame is independent. There's nothing wrong with it acting in its own autonomous interest. If college football is unstable, particularly right now with the conferences, nobody forced the Big Ten to go grab UCLA and USC or Oregon and Washington. Like it seems like you're blaming Notre Dame for not joining a conference to stabilize things, but that was never in our interest, especially back then when Notre Dame's TV deal was bigger than what they would have got in the conferences. You talked about, in the 90s, Notre Dame should have joined. I hear this a lot, too. A lot of Notre Dame's too snobby. They turned us down. They had their shot. Well, I don't know if you guys know this, but Notre Dame begged to get into the Big Ten for about half a century. They were not allowed in, partially because of the religious affiliation and partially because of a certain school in Ann Arbor didn't want them in. They tried many times. They were both blackballed from the Western Conference and the Big Ten at separate periods. And they had been boycotted from the Western Conference. Michigan had tried to get another boycott again in the Big Ten, and not all the members agreed, such as Purdue and Michigan State, which is why I have an affinity for those programs. So I just find it rich. It's like, well, you just should have joined. And I'm thinking, well, you should have just let us in back in 1908 when we had applied for original membership. I don't know why this is Notre Dame's problem, that the rest of college football is messed up and that we have to now join a conference to save it. And I really hate that this Big Ten Notre Dame debate or story seems to always start in the 90s and not a century earlier when the Big Ten was formed and when Notre Dame wanted it.
In 1926, 97 years ago, Fielding Yost, who was a racist piece of shit, we're not going to deny it. He hated Catholics. He hated blacks. He was an evil, evil man through and through, a typical Michigan man. His
agree on that.
His father is the Confederate soldier. I mean, look it up. I'm not making this up.
We don't need to. It doesn't matter.
We got the point.
We understand.
But that was 97 years ago.
Right.
You've been extended multiple invitations since then.
Right. And I'm seeing comments in saying, like, let it go. It's not that we're holding on to it. It's an important part of the story of why we're not in the Big Ten. Blame Michigan. that Notre Dame would have been in the Big Ten a long time ago. We're not holding out because of that. And the proof is, if that was what was holding us from joining a conference, we would have been in another conference already. The fact that Notre Dame is still independent has nothing to do with Michigan from 1908, right? This is something to do with that is what made us independent. And Notre Dame becoming independent forced them to go national. They were the team that traveled the country. That's where their branding comes from. Being independent and being unique in this sense was forced upon Notre Dame. And you know what? Now that it's favorable for you guys to have us, it's not favorable for us. It was favorable for us back then. And it's just, our autonomy is never really respected in this, especially the fact that we wanted in. And I'm not saying, look, Michigan's presence in the Big Ten today is a problem. Not the case. I understand Michigan's not like that anymore. I would love to play them regularly. That's not the issue. This is who we've become. This is what we were forced into, and it was a major underdog success story. Notre Dame went from being this tiny Catholic school in the middle of Indiana that couldn't get anybody on their schedule to being the most dominant program of the 20th century, right? Their presence in pop culture is ridiculous for a school that hasn't won a national championship since 1988, although they should claim 1993. It's an important part of the story, and it's just when I hear some of that narrative, I wanted to push it in, and that national aspect is huge because that is what makes Notre Dame so Notre Dame, is that they are national, and that's what makes the Big Ten more attractive now than ever. So it goes both ways. That is something that helps, but Notre Dame is its identity and its brand matters is what I'm getting at.
And nobody's asking Notre Dame to forget that or remove that from their history, but most Notre Dame fans, one of the first things they bring up when it's talked about joining a conference is what happened in 1926.
Sure.
Which was 97 years ago.
Yeah,
it's not a legitimate reason to avoid being in a conference now.
I would agree with that, by the way. Sorry, Nathan, if I could.
No, you're fine. Go ahead, finish.
I don't want to be a total homer here, and it's something that I think Notre Dame fans misunderstand as well. I have seen Notre Dame fans argue that's the reason they won't join the Big Ten. I promise you, the University of Notre Dame is not making that decision based on 100-year-old beef. There are other reasons for independence, such as having a vote on the CFP, having not needing to share any of the revenue that you make, being able to schedule. I mean, the ACC thing makes it a little more difficult, but Notre Dame gets 7 free games to schedule. There are benefits. Being on NBC as a broadcast is its own thing, because that is a branding thing as well. What other program has its own network? Texas tried, and how did that turn out for them? So I will totally give you that moan. But there are reasons for independence, and I do think Notre Dame fans should stop bringing that up first. It is important for, I think, the story of what's happened, but yeah, I agree with you. It's not a reason anymore. But I will bring it up when I need to say, hey, we did want in. It's not like we just been turning you down forever.
I'm not denying that, but I'll close this out. If Notre Dame's claiming 93 trophy, then Penn State has every right to claim the 94 trophy when they join the Big Ten.
Okay.
And for the record, Ohio State was not against Notre Dame joining the Big Ten or the Western Conference in 1926.
Okay.
Ohio State had nothing to do with it. So
fair enough.
But we can walk away from this 100-year-old history and move on to fresh things now. Summit Hawk, who happens to be one of our members, and by the way, I want to remind everybody, Summit Hawk has given me both a Kansas and Kansas State flag. He has given me this KU helmet, and then I got this. Brent Nichols sent me this KU pennant. I don't have anything from anybody else. You guys, I know you're from different schools out there. I know Oklahoma State people are here. I know that there are people from Iowa State. I know there are people from UCF. If you guys want your stuff repped, and I always give credit to the people who give me stuff, send me a DM and I will give you my address and send me your gear. I don't care if it's all tattered and 20 years old. Pay the $3 for the shipping and send it to me, and I'll start repping your school, because right now those other schools are not getting anything, and I think it's sad, outside of BYU, but they're kind of my default. Summit Hawk says, grew up a Catholic kid loving Notre Dame and still follow them. They are definitely beloved. Nobody's denying that. I want to be very clear. I still do not. I'm jealous. I'm willing to admit I'm jealous for the access that Notre Dame has. I'm jealous that they've had the amount of control, for lack of a better word, on college football. If my school had that same opportunity, I absolutely would covet it. I think we're just getting to a point now, and let's talk about it. This is the bridge to the next comment, or the next section, is where are we with the Notre Dame deal with NBC? We've heard rumors they asked for $75 million, which is basically, what would it be, $15 million a game for just the NBC. It would be like $12 million a game for the NBC home games. Where does that stand now? Are they going to settle for 45 or 50 if that's all they can get, Dylan?
Great question. The first thing I want to bring up with the $75 million figure is I don't think that needs to come all from NBC. I think that's what Notre Dame is hoping to get between the NBC deal and the ACC payouts. Between the ACC payouts, they get about $20 million a year. So they only really need 50 from NBC to kind of hit that range. I think they'll get more. There's been so much optimism within the ND circles on this. The fact that basically the person you would have been negotiating against is now your new athletic director in waiting suggests to me that I think a deal is done. I think it's just formalities. I think from what I've heard, I believe they put talks on hold so they could onboard and get Pete Bavacqua up to speed. But I mean, that would be one hell of a conflict of interest to be negotiating against Notre Dame, and then all of a sudden you're now negotiating against your employer for Notre Dame. I think that's probably done. I'm going to guess the deal starts with a 6, but I don't think it hits a 7. But they'll get their money overall, and that'll keep them competitive with the Big Ten once you combine the ACC payouts with NBC. But I know people disagree with that. It's one we'll have to wait and see. But I'm feeling pretty good as a Notre Dame fan that that'll get announced maybe this fall.
Okay.
Right. So you make a good point on that. But let me ask you: could not the reverse and the opposite also be the situation? I'm not saying for you to say, yeah, that's likely happened or not, but just if the deal already being done is what makes sense because of the whole employment issue, and that does make sense, could it not also be possible that the opposite is the truth and that they already know that they're not going to get a deal?
Yes, I think that's also likely, or at least opposite in the sense that they're not getting the money they want. I think they know what they're getting from NBC, and they're either going to accept it and maybe fold into the Big Ten, or it'll be enough for them to stay independent. If they weren't getting a deal from NBC, I would have expected something to leak by now because Notre Dame would take that to market. CBS has a primetime slot open, I believe, for college football, theoretically. ESPN has a bazillion channels. So none of it is as good as NBC. Like, that's one of the premier slots right now, that 3:30 Eastern, 2:30 kickoff primetime thing Notre Dame gets. So obviously, they probably wouldn't get as much from another competitor, but if they didn't get a deal, I think you would have heard something about them negotiating with someone else by now.
And can you see, though, like from a network perspective, why, I'm just going to be honest, the deal with Notre Dame seemed like a great thing for both Notre Dame and NBC for a long time, until NBC decided to sign up with the Big Ten. If, like, for instance, if Notre Dame was to move into the Big Ten now, NBC wouldn't be on the hook for the full. I think we're looking at, $70 to $80 million per team in the Big Ten, whereas they would only be paying for a third of what's going to Notre Dame. Whereas when they're paying Notre Dame direct, they're asking for $70 million, they'd be paying basically 3 times the amount just to have Notre Dame on. So, and I know this is a tough one for Notre Dame fans, and this is the one I try not to like pound down too hard on, but is the reality there with the Notre Dame faithful that business-wise, this deal may not make sense anymore, and we may need to seriously look at conference possibilities?
Definitely. I mean, Jack Schwarbrick has come out and said that's one of the 3 pillars of independence is competing financially, competing in the playoff, and then having a home for the Olympic sports. So, yeah, that is a big one. I would say it's a great question. Why would NBC pay more for Notre Dame? And if I were to guess, I have no idea, but I would say it has to do with the exclusivity of Notre Dame. They would get all 7 Notre Dame home games versus if they were folded in the Big Ten. They would get a few for sure, but they wouldn't get all of them. And why does that matter? Well, that goes back to branding. Notre Dame and NBC have an agreement that's lasted for well over 30 years now. It's part of both of those. It's part of NBC's sports broadcasting brand is having that Notre Dame aspect, and then part of Notre Dame's brand is you're on NBC, and it's been mutually beneficial that way. NBC's never felt the need to go into the college game, which has been to the detriment of Notre Dame's ratings, because if you look at Notre Dame's TV ratings on ESPN versus NBC against the same team, they're wildly different, but that's going to change. And the second reason I think NBC is willing to pay Notre Dame more than perhaps people may perceive them to be worth, because obviously $12 million a game is ridiculous for 7 home games, is the absolute value here in having that shoulder programming of Big Ten Notre Dame 1-2 punch. And it'll
Right.
be Notre Dame usually leading into the Big Ten, which is where they spent most of their money. And in reverse weeks when Notre Dame's getting their best games on the schedule. So this year it's Ohio State and USC, absolutely phenomenal games for a network. Then you've got a great Big Ten game probably leading into it. So I think that in its own right has value to NBC, which is why they're probably willing to pay more than Notre Dame might be worth in a vacuum, is to have that shoulder programming. And then also the branding. That would be my guess. To answer the other question. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I was just real quick into that, and if I could, Bomber, if you don't mind. So I think in the past that makes a lot of sense because you're looking at Notre Dame compared to 2, maybe 3 equivalent brands in the Big Ten, and I can see Notre Dame saying we don't want to lose out on having a big game with a big brand. But as you see the likes of USC coming in and Oregon coming in, and with Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, if Notre Dame was there and NBC didn't get the Notre Dame game because someone else picked it, there would still be plenty of other choice, though.
Oh, definitely, and I think Notre Dame would they know they're going to be on national television. I just think it's something to do with that, with that brand value, which Notre Dame is super protective of, which is why this independence means a lot because it's nobody else can do it like this. It's that uniqueness of it that is what the brand is. Whether you roll your eyes at Notre Dame calling themselves special and unique, I get it. Like I understand how this sounds to other fans, but that's their brand. Is that look, we're different. We're not a Big Ten school. We're in Big Ten country, but we're national, right? We've got the Irish connection, we've got the Catholic connection, we've got your grandfather who was neither, but just grew up a Notre Dame fan. They've got all this. So yeah, I think it goes back to branding. I'm concerned if Notre Dame doesn't get the money, because a lot of people say, well, look at the endowment, right? They'll surely be able to fund it that way. I don't know if that's how that works, right? Athletic departments have budgets, and I think one of the ways to get Notre Dame is with the pocketbook. And if you've asked me kind of a few minutes ago if this could impact Notre Dame's financial future and if that could be a way in, and I think so. I think that is one of the ways. So even if Notre Dame does get their TV deal, they got to do it again off of the next one. They have to keeping pace with the Big Ten, which is why for me, it's not the dollar amount that I find super interesting on this next TV contract. It's the term. Because the genius of the Big Ten deal with the 3 networks, because it is one of the best deals you'll ever see. You're getting major exposure on all 3. It's the length of it. The Big Ten is going back to market soon before most of their competitors. And once the SEC goes to market, the Big Ten is back to market again. So Notre Dame has to stay competitive with the Big Ten, which means the term of the contract has to be aligned with the Big Ten because you don't want to create more gaps, right? If Notre Dame signs a 10-year deal, well, that's 4 years, I think, of TV broadcast payouts that would be less than the Big Ten because Notre Dame is 1 or 2 behind already. And if they were to sign for longer, that becomes an issue. So it's not just the monetary amount. It's if you're going to actually sustain independence, you're going to have to keep doing this. And that could be ultimately what pushes Notre Dame into a conference because that'll be tough to do.
When does the media deal with NBC, the current one, term? Is it 25?
I think it starts the next one will start in the 25 season because
so they're negotiating now to start basically to be ready for 25.
Yes. The way I understand it is they're 2 years behind the Big Ten, but I could be wrong on that. I should have prepared ahead of time, but my understanding is it'll be for 25.
Yeah. And then what we're looking at here, there's access and then the college football playoff, which just happens to be the next year. Yep. So it's really interesting the way that timing works out. We all know they're going back to the drawing board with with the college football playoff. And in doing so, there is a distinct possibility that the rest of the 10 decide, it's just inordinate, the amount of control that we've given to one school. Maybe it's time that we vote for our best interest and bring more people in. Do you see that as a potential possibility in the future?
Absolutely. There's so many. It's almost like one of those novels where you create your own adventure and you seem to die in many ways. It seems to be like that with Notre Dame. Is just what will be the death blow to independence if it comes.
Right.
It could be that. It could be the finances. It could be scheduling. I'm happy to share at some point what it would be for me. As just a Notre Dame fan, but yeah,
why don't you just say it now? Go ahead and tell us
All right.
now.
Well, the reason this is a little. I don't know, spicy is because if it got out that this was the university's position, the leverage between the Notre Dame and the Big Ten would switch completely. It would go from Notre Dame being able to say, no, we can do this on our own. We have this leverage, to the Big Ten having Notre Dame by the balls. Pardon my language. For me, it's if USC said you have to join or we can't play anymore. To me,
Oh, wow.
that's the day independence dies, because as much as independence is part of Notre Dame's brand, so too is its rivalries. And I will sacrifice every damn rivalry except that one. I think for many reasons, that's the best rivalry in the sport, in the sense of maybe the term rivalry of two respectful colleagues always fighting for excellence. That had been most of Notre Dame and USC's history. That's a blue blood. As much as I don't like them, I love them. And I wouldn't want to not play them anymore. And for this Notre Dame fan, that is the tipping point. That's all it would take is USC one phone call and I'm in. I don't know if Notre Dame as an institution and as the fan base would agree. I know many Notre Dame fans out there, including Terry. If you're on Twitter, you'll definitely come across Terry with the expansion Notre Dame talk. And he's like, no, if USC says that, by USC. And there are certainly Notre Dame fans who agree. I don't know what the institution would say, but for me, that would be enough to get me to join the Big Ten. And to me, there's no real question which conference I would want to join. I would leverage all of them to get the best out of it. But the Big Ten is clearly the best fit for Notre Dame at this point.
If I could add to that real quick, to make that a little bit sweeter, say this thing goes down at the ACC and the Big Ten wants you to be number 19 and they're looking to add in one more ACC school, just one. And they come to Notre Dame and say, which one of these is going to make you say yes? What school would you say?
Well, I don't know if there's a school out there that would just on their own make us say yes. The school I'm most interested in is Stanford in the ACC in this theoretical scenario, or?
I don't know. What do you say, Moen?
No, because I think if Notre Dame joined, that Notre Dame has the most leverage right now. Notre Dame could make if Notre Dame joined, I think we talked about this the other night, Stanford and Cal would immediately be added to the Big Ten.
Right, and Navy and Boston College. No, I joke. I know they're not getting in.
I think he's saying besides Stanford, because there's different talks about it, but I tend to agree. I think that Stanford would maybe, if Notre Dame joins, they might be willing to give up some of the things they have to give up. But besides them, an existing ACC school.
Yeah, so to put on both my Notre Dame hat and my Big Ten member hat, I'm a loyal Big Ten fan in this scenario. I would say Miami, because I think they're an excellent fit academically. Recruiting wise, you get right into not just Florida, but that rich area of Miami. They're a brand. They're a sleeping giant in my estimation. I think Florida State's a bigger brand right now and worth more, but when they're both at their best, I think Miami is just on a different level of appeal. Don't let any Miami fan hear me say this, by the way, because they're insufferable, but it's got to be Miami. Notre Dame, Miami's got a great rivalry. I think that's great from our perspective, and I think from the Big Ten's perspective, it fits well. They're also a private institution, which gives a little more allies to Notre Dame if we were to join the Big Ten, because one area of the ACC is a better fit, is it's a better mix of public and private schools, whereas the Big Ten has traditionally been just big, major research public schools. Yeah. So for many reasons, Notre Dame's perspective, it'd be Miami. And also, I think from a Big Ten perspective, if I was a member, Miami would be maybe my top target right now.
Let's talk some realignment.
Can I get a follow-up real quick?
Sure, go ahead.
Assuming the Big Ten goes to 24, Stanford and Cal are in, Miami and Notre Dame are in, who are the last two that you would pick from the ACC?
And I get a choice of anybody. Like the SEC doesn't matter here, like what they do.
Oh, it's just ACC.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay,
just
so
ACC.
I'm gonna. But yeah, I just mean in the sense that the SEC might, go pick up Clemson and Florida State in retaliation.
Let's take Clemson and Florida State out of it.
Okay, so one of my answers would have been Florida State otherwise. So I'll cross them off. Number one for me is North Carolina. Again, academic fit that fits perfectly what the Big Ten is looking for profile wise. Huge brand, the basketball they bring, lots of great reasons for North Carolina. And selfishly, as a Notre Dame fan, I'm going to throw this out here. I want the Pitt Panthers in the Big Ten. I know we live in we live in a weird world now where being in the Midwest, or that area at least, actually hurts you for joining the Big Ten. But they are a great academic school. It's a team Notre Dame has played over 70 times, which still staggers me because it doesn't really feel like it. From a Notre Dame perspective, I'd love to have them in. We get along. The academics are great. But if I was the Big Ten, you're probably looking at Virginia, maybe Georgia Tech. I know somebody on the show would say Kansas from another conference, but
Right.
you got lots of options there. So ideally Florida State, North Carolina, but if Florida State's off the market, I'll take North Carolina and Pitt.
So let's just talk some general realignment stuff. We'll cruise through a few comments that we've got over here. This one from Mike Smith, who joined the show late. Nice to see you, Mike. He says, please tell me the ACC is not interested in SMU and that Stanford is not really going to play rent-free for 3 years. Does anybody, let's just throw it down right now. Does anybody think that Stanford's actually going to make it into the ACC?
No.
Under the right circumstances, if the right deal was made internally in the ACC, yes. As of right now, I can understand how to most people it does not look that way. But we shall see.
Okay, so you say no, but you're hedging your bet a little bit.
I mean, it's going to require an exit agreement for other schools now. So that comes down to how much we think that's ready to happen right now. I still tend to think that they're not ready to do it right now, but it could happen soon. And I think that's what Stanford entering is agreed upon.
Okay. Dylan?
Yeah, I'm with Immaculate there. Like I said earlier, gun to my head, no. But what I've learned in my brief time of following expansion and just college football in general, you can't predict this stuff sometimes. I mean, the best can, but it is such a chaotic sport and anything can happen. I never saw 2 California schools going to the Big Ten. So maybe, but I'm going to say no.
Very fair. I think we're all probably right, whatever that means. Summit Hawk says, Bomber, you probably feel the same way about BYU Utah. Look, I had the Holy War ripped away for 13 years, and it's hurt. Even though we played them 10 times, it hurt every year to not know that you're going to be playing them forever. So to have them in the Big 12, I feel the same way about USC and Notre Dame, just like Dylan described. It's painful to imagine those rivalries torn apart. As we've discussed, now we have Oregon and Oregon State's busted up. Washington State's busted up. What's interesting about all those things is that Bob Thompson says rivalry is like the second or third most important thing in all of the considerations for realignment. So the fact that these, relationships were torn asunder and thrown to the wayside. I think, Dylan, you're hedging your bets there a little bit. Who knows? Maybe USC does finally throw it down and say, we love you, you're our brother, but at the end of the day, we don't think you should have more power than we do.
Yep, I could see it happening. I would hate for that to happen. I would rather, if anything, maybe a gentleman's phone call letting us know ahead of time so we can come in on our own terms so we don't have to have that awkward public fallout.
Right.
If I'm gonna be stabbed here, I'd rather not be in the back from my best friend in this case. So hopefully it goes another way. But yeah, it's possible. I could see it happening, especially if the Big Ten goes to 10 games. I think that's something that's likely. And you talk about rivalries. I mean, I was saying on the podcast, Notre Dame, I think, has more Big Ten rivals than anybody in the Big Ten. Like there's so many historic games there.
True.
It is true.
And it's beautiful because Notre Dame's also got rivals in the ACC too, and that's kind of what makes it fun. But it would be a ready-made fit, and you talk about the networks, the amount of money they'd be able to make, not just off Notre Dame, but that rivalry aspect, because that is a big one.
If I could go ahead.
Go ahead, Immaculate.
Just real quick, and then back to you because you definitely ties into what I'm about to say. I think that there's this feeling from Notre Dame fans that most of the Big Ten fans don't like them or don't want them to be part of here because for so long it's been this kind of discourse of conversation that it's kind of negative. But I actually don't think that's the case, and I even think Moen would agree with this, is that Notre Dame just seems perfectly suited for the Big Ten. And the one problem that we've had is that it hasn't been national enough, because what people don't maybe talk about enough, and I've looked into Notre Dame, is where you guys actually recruit students. You guys are not a Midwestern focus, besides, Indiana and Illinois. You get a lot of students from California, from New York, from Florida, from Texas. So, I mean, if you start to look at us, and if we pull these schools out of the ACC that are attuned to Notre Dame, and you're saying if we go to 10 schools, I mean, would you almost consider it in the bag then at that point in time that Notre Dame is probably going to have to join the Big Ten?
Is that for me or Moan? Sorry.
Well, for you and also for Mo, in that if when this day happens, that I actually think it'll be quite a natural bond, and that there won't be all the hate that maybe Notre Dame fans think that's out there.
Yeah, one of the reasons we're doing this too is I feel like both sides have different perceptions of each other. Like I feel like we come off as snobby and we look down on the Big Ten, which I don't think is the case. I think I love the Big Ten West, the Iowa, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Minnesota. Those fans have been nothing but great to interact with. I've got no problems. And from the Big Ten perspective, you're right. It does feel like we're hated a lot for many reasons, and that we're not really want it. We're just kind of want it for the money. And if you really cared about us, things would be a little different. But I do agree that if it were to happen, I think there'd be an initial disappointment. There'd be a day of grieving, and then we would get over it, and it would be pretty exciting, I think, for many reasons. Overall, I would still not want it, but it's not the end of the world. You would have such a seamless fit with a lot of these fan bases. On Twitter, we try to get representation and friendly with as many of them as we can. And a lot of the Big Ten schools, no issue. I could see us fitting in there excellent. So I think it's a great point and observation. And hopefully this discussion we're having today can kind of help bridge the gap between the Notre Dame and Big Ten fans, or just any fan who may not have a Notre Dame source of information in their life.
Hey, Moen, what's your statement that you say about Notre Dame?
Bend the knee.
And before that one,
no future big expansion without
Notre Dame.
But I just want to put this out here real quick. I know we got to wrap up, but the NBC media negotiations, I think one of the things NBC is waiting on is Big Ten scheduling moving forward. With the additions of Oregon and Washington, I think they want to see if the Big Ten is going to move to 10 conference games, because I think that's a real possibility now that we're at 18 teams, that 10 conference games becomes a thing. And that could be the thing where, USC has to say at that point, hey, look, we got a murderer's row. We got to play Oregon, Washington, Ohio State, Michigan. We can't. We're looking for a playoff spot. We might not be able to schedule a Notre Dame in there. We got to schedule some softballs. So I think that plays a part in it. But going back to it, I think for me, I don't like Notre Dame as the institution, and I'm an Ohio State guy. I've never liked them. The only time I like Notre Dame is when they're playing against Michigan. That's the only time I'll root for Notre Dame. I'll root against them every other time. But that being said, I want them in the Big Ten. I want them to be playing their natural rivals in Michigan and Purdue yearly. I want to see those games every year. I want big matchups in the Big Ten. And if we can get Miami on board, I'm telling you what, I've been watching football since the late 1970s. My God, the rivalries we will have in the Big Ten Conference. Notre Dame, Miami, Penn State, Miami, Nebraska, Miami. I mean, it will be ungodly how much fun we will have in that conference. So it would be something I would look forward to.
Just think of how many egos would be in that conference, both as a fan base and just as an institution, right? Like Ohio State, I feel like one of the reasons you don't like us is because, you feel like, you're as good or better than us, and we're the ones getting all this treatment, right? So you have an ego. We have an ego. Michigan, well, we all know how they are. Miami, USC. Wait till you guys get the USC fans in here. That'll be excellent. So yeah, it would be such a compelling conference, and I'm so down for taking the SEC off their perch and bringing football championships back north. I'm fully happy with that. I'm on board with it. And I'd love to see Michigan State, Michigan, Purdue every year. That's one of the criticisms I have of Notre Dame at the moment is, okay, I understand the ACC move and I understand scheduling, maybe some changes had to be made, but look, the ACC has failed us from a scheduling standpoint. When we joined, Florida State had just won a national championship, and Clemson was 2 years away from winning one. And now Notre Dame has gone 28-0 against the ACC in regular season games in the last 4 years. So I would love to get those games back, whether we're in the Big Ten or not. And I think Notre Dame has the capacity to do it. And hey, if it's through the Big Ten, it's through the Big Ten. But I want my Septembers to have 2 Michigan games in them.
Here's a comment here from Summit Hawk, again, one of our members. He says, I've heard Notre Dame KU add if Stanford doesn't go to the Big due to Big wanting basketball school. You guys have heard anything like that? That's news to me. I've never heard that.
I think that's wishful thinking from Summit Hawk. They'd have to add another West Coast school. They'd have to.
Okay, very good. There's a lot of comments here from Connor, who's an Oregon State Beaver fan. Connor, just so you know, I think all of us would love to have Washington State and Oregon State in the Big 12. The only way I think that happens is if the Cal and Stanford move to the ACC happens. If it doesn't happen, then I'm afraid you guys are going to have a tough time the next few years. And that's through no fault of your own. You guys, as I said the very first day that I started this channel, I wanted everybody at Washington State and Oregon State to be in a conference that makes sense. And that's not in the Mountain West, and it's not in a Pac 32 with some of the schools that are being proposed. So I think right now, anybody that's an Oregon State fan should be praying that Cal and Stanford go to the ACC. Otherwise, I think you guys are going to be stuck for a while, unfortunately. All right, we've got only just a couple minutes here. I'll let you guys sign off. Connor, first, why don't you tell us where everybody can find you and kind of what you guys do on your show?
Yeah, you can find us on Twitter mostly. I joke that we're a podcast second and a Twitter account first for the content we provide. So it's at Horseman Pod. You can find us anywhere you get podcasts for Horseman Podcast. There's 3 of us, me, P-Wagon, and Steve. I'm more of the conference realignment geek than they are. In fact, P-Wagon wanted me to send a message on the chat today saying, to hell with all conferences. So I have to give him representation.
I like that. That's good.
There is that aspect of us. So find us there. Come give us a follow. We're definitely propagandists, and we definitely start fights with other fan bases for fun. But there is some charm and there is some decent analysis in there if you can get past the abrasive Notre Dame fans. So I'm very glad to have been on the show. Thank you guys for having me. Everybody in the chat, thanks for showing up. And yeah, I look forward to maybe doing this again sometime, and hopefully not in a situation where Notre Dame has been forced to join a conference, but any other time's great.
Moen?
Yeah, I just want to thank Dylan for being here. We tried to keep it as we can disagree without being disagreeable, as Greg Flugart always says. We're both entitled to our opinion. I don't agree with his, but I can't wait for the day that Notre Dame finally bends that knee and joins the Big Ten Conference. And we get 24 teams of fantastic college football to watch from noon to midnight.
There we go. Immaculate.
Well, yeah, I just want to reiterate, thanks, Dylan, for coming on. And I certainly hope it's not the last time. I think this could get quite interesting if we have another one of these meetings during the season. You and Moen have been very gracious. It might get a little heated in here in the season. I think that could be a lot of fun. But, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. We might need to talk to you again here real soon should things pop off in the ACC in terms of realignment. So thanks for coming in and kind of giving us the Notre Dame perspective on it.
I appreciate that. And, week 4, Notre Dame and Ohio State, Notre Dame Stadium, might have to come back on the show to talk that one. I think I think that'll be a really, really good football game. So, yeah, thanks, guys. I really appreciate it, and I'm glad to have kind of found a community here as well. That's something that's been neat about this is it is a very unique community, and it's very uplifting and supportive, which is I think awesome, and the beautiful side of social media, and not the ugly side that we always see. So yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it, and go Irish.
Yeah, okay, so Dylan, thanks for being on the show. Appreciate it. Last comment from Jared Jones, who's an Ohio State super fan for the show. He says, another amazing show. Moen and Immaculate are my guys. Bomber, this is a fabulous channel. Keep up the awesomeness. Appreciate you all. I appreciate you for your super chats. I appreciate everybody who came to watch. We were at a consistent 80 people the entire show. I appreciate the time you guys gave on a early Tuesday afternoon or an early evening. And I just want everybody to know out there, we're here for you, that we're not here for us. So anything we can do to help you, send us ideas, DMs about show ideas and whatnot, and we'll try to put those into action. And certainly, Dylan, I like that idea of that Ohio State week. Let's you and I stay in contact. There's something else I need to ask you about as well. So I'll just stay in contact with you on Twitter, and then you and I can just, maybe we can talk offline. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely.
All right. If you want to stick around, we do a little after show, and then we'll be out the door. As it goes to everybody else, thanks for being here. I appreciate all the conversation. As usual, we had some of the best comments, I think, in all of social media on our show, and we really appreciate them. And I want you guys to know how much we appreciate being here for you. And send me your gear. I want it. I want more stuff behind me. Anyway, everybody have a great night. Stay out of trouble, and we'll talk soon.